Wang Wei doesn't talk. He can't. He's mute. And for most films, that would be a problem worth solving, a workaround, a note in the script that explains itself away and moves on. The Furious doesn't move on. It builds everything around that silence. Wei is a Chinese wushu champion living somewhere in Southeast Asia. The film was shot in Bangkok, the city left deliberately unnamed. He has a daughter, Rainey. She gets taken by a trafficking ring. The police do nothing. And so Wei does what the film has been quietly telling you he would do from the first frame. He uses the only language he has.
What director Kenji Tanigaki, the first Japanese member of the Hong Kong Stuntman Association, understood is that action cinema doesn't need words. It needs bodies. And he's assembled a cast whose bodies each speak a different dialect. Joe Taslim, who trained in judo, fighters carrying Pencak Silat, Muay Thai, wushu. Every encounter is a negotiation between traditions. Every room has its own logic. This is pure physical cinema. No compromise, no shortcuts. 5 things make it work.
That's what Tanigaki establishes immediately. Wei walks into a room and the room goes quiet, because he goes quiet. No posturing, no announcement, just a stillness that the other person in the room has to decide what to do with. Wei can't speak, he's not communicating nothing. His body is doing something more precise than language. It's waiting. And when the waiting ends, it ends completely. The film is built on that gap between silence and what breaks it. That's the first thing worth following.
There's a moment in Hana-bi, Takeshi Kitano's 1997 Japanese crime film, where a man we've watched do almost nothing for 30 minutes crosses a room and does something terrible to someone in about 4 seconds. No build-up, no announcement. Just stillness, and then violence, and then stillness again. Kitano plays Nishi, a former detective whose wife is dying. He owes money to the Yakuza. He robs banks to pay them back. The film follows him on a last road trip with his wife through snow and cherry blossom. Quiet. It has barely any conventional story. No convention at all, really. What it has is a man whose body is the only text worth reading. Kitano, as director, keeps the camera on himself constantly. He sits, he stands, he stares. He performs almost no expression. And then, the violence arrives like a weather event, sudden, complete, and gone. That tension between absolute stillness and absolute force is what Hana-bi lives inside. It's the same register Wang Wei operates in. When a character can't use words, the body becomes the argument. Kitano understood that before almost anyone. What Hana-bi has in sparseness, the Furious has in density. And once Wei starts moving, Tanigaki makes a specific choice that not enough action films bother with. He designs the fight around wherever it happens to be. The ice factory sequence doesn't just take place somewhere cold, it uses the cold. The condensation on the floor, the machinery is cover, the narrow channels between industrial shelving that force both bodies into the same lane. Before Wei throws a single strike, the room has already decided how the fight will go. That's the next thing the Furious understands.
Nanobots help Gray.
Upgrade is a 2018 science fiction film from Lee Waddell about a man named Gray who is paralyzed in an attack that kills his wife. He's given an experimental AI chip, STEM, that restores his mobility, and when he grants it control, turns his body into something efficient and frightening. The fights in this film are architectural arguments. In a cluttered apartment hallway, STEM calculates angles and obstacles. In a warehouse, the sightlines change the entire geometry of what's possible. In a kitchen, the countertops become cover and weapons simultaneously. Wattle shoots it all in long, unbroken takes, the camera locked to Gray's head so you feel the spatial logic as Stem calculates it.
That's the connection. In The Furious, the ice factory isn't just a location, it's a weapon system. The condensation on the floor affects traction, the machinery creates cover, the cold slows certain kinds of movement. Tanigaki designs every environment so that a fighter who understands the room has an advantage over one who doesn't. Both films arrived at the same understanding. Space isn't neutral. Every wall is a decision. The environments in The Furious are doing a lot of work, but so is the casting. Because Tanigaki didn't just assemble skilled fighters, he assembled fighters from different countries and different traditions, and he made sure you can feel the difference. Joe Taslim's background is judo. His character pulls, redirects, takes way off his base. A wushu fighter versus a judo practitioner doesn't just mean two sets of moves, it means two completely different theories of what fighting is for. Across 5 major confrontations, The Furious essentially stages a living debate between Asian martial traditions. You're watching each discipline argue its case. Sifu is a 2022 action game from Slowcloud, a French studio who worked closely with a real Pak Mei Kung Fu master to build its combat system from the ground up. You play a young martial artist hunting down 5 fighters responsible for your father's murder. Each one trained differently, each fight is a different conversation. The aging mechanic is what makes it extraordinary. Every time you die, you come back older, faster to tire, harder to kill in a single hit, but carrying less life to spend. Die enough times in your 20s and you complete the game as an old man. The game is asking whether mastery can compensate for what the body loses. The answer, as it turns out, depends entirely on whether you've learned to read your opponent's style. That's precisely what Wei has to do in The Furious. Joe Taslim's character fights in judo, throws, leverage, the ground. Wei's wushu is built on speed and angles. Each matchup in the film requires a different response, a different vocabulary. The film is a living atlas of Asian martial traditions, each one brought to bear by a performer who actually carries it. Sifu builds that same atlas in interactive form. Discipline isn't one thing. It never was. What makes that debate meaningful is that it isn't abstract. It's personal. Wei didn't develop his wushu in a gym. He developed it to protect his daughter. And Rainey isn't passive. She's been watching her father train her whole life, and when the crisis comes, she responds with something that's been built into her. That's the uncomfortable question underneath The Furious. When a parent teaches a child to fight because the world is dangerous, where does protection end and burden begin? Wei loves Rainey. He also made her capable of surviving without him. The film isn't entirely sure those two things are the same gesture. Kick-Ass, Matthew Vaughn's 2010 superhero film, is a lot of things, some of them genuinely uncomfortable. But the thing it got exactly right is Mindy McCready, known as Hit Girl. 11 years old, trained since she could walk by her father, Big Daddy, to be precise and lethal. She doesn't experience combat as trauma or spectacle, she experiences it as problem solving. That's the provocative idea the film puts forward and refuses to flinch from. What does it mean to raise a child as a weapon? Big Daddy isn't a monster. He believes he's preparing her for a world that would otherwise eat her alive. Whether that's love or abuse is a question the film leaves genuinely open. The Furious carries a version of the same tension. Rainey has been trained in wushu by her father. She is not helpless. She is not passive. When the crisis comes, she draws on exactly what Wei has given her. The film asks whether a father who teaches his child to fight is protecting her or burdening her, and whether, in this world, there's a difference. Kick-Ass asked that first, louder and without a safety net.
The Furious isn't shy about where it comes from. Tanigaki has spent his career working in Hong Kong and Thai action cinema, the stunts, the choreography, the refusal to fake anything. He knows exactly which tradition he's working inside. There's a sequence mid-film where Wei fights through a cramped corridor, and it's almost a direct conversation with The Raid, with Bruce Lee, with every film that ever said, a body that knows what it's doing doesn't need help from a computer. This film is made by someone who grew up watching the same movies you did if you care about this genre, and chose to answer them. Ong-Bak was made in Bangkok in 2003. Tony Jaa wanted to bring Muay Thai to an international audience. He and his choreographer Pana Rittikrai struggled for years to raise money just for a demo reel, shot on expired film stock the first time, started over. When the film finally arrived, it opened with a title card that said, no wires, no CGI, no stunt doubles. That wasn't a boast, it was a manifesto. At a moment when martial arts cinema was moving toward wire work, digital enhancement, camera tricks, Ong-Bak pointed back at the body and said, this is enough. A rural boy, pure-hearted, physically absurd, trained in one tradition and committed to it completely, goes to Bangkok to retrieve something stolen from his village. The plot exists to connect the fights. The fights exist to prove a point. The Furious is making the same argument 22 years later on the same streets. No shortcuts, real choreography, a mute man and the traditions he carries. Kenji Tanigaki and Tony Jaa never work together, but they share a conviction that action cinema earns its power through physical honesty, and that the body, given the right space and the right opponent, is capable of something that no effect can replicate. Ong-Bak said it first and loudest. The Furious says it back. Hana-bi, Upgrade, Sifu, Kick-Ass, Ong-Bak. 5 works that understand, each in their own way, what it means to let the body do the talking. If The Furious got to you, drop it in the comments. And if you've seen something that belongs on this list that we missed, we want to know. Like and subscribe if this is your kind of thing. We'll see you in the next one.